Greetings, friends. This is Chris Batts, and you are listening to episode number 13 of the Future is Bright podcast. In today's episode, I spoke with Amy Moore Harris, EVP, Chief Legal Officer of UMB Financial, which is Kansas City's largest bank. We discussed her initial career aspirations in theater that led her to Mizzou Law School. We discussed her love for litigation, her experience post-law school, and then eventually going in-house. We talked about the corporate culture of UMB and how it gave her permission to be creative with her career and discover her strengths. Stay till the end to hear her passion on being a supportive, servant-oriented, empathetic leader, her love for giving back, and so much more. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast and leave a review on iTunes and YouTube. A bit more about Amy. Today, Amy is responsible for the management, strategy, and operations of UMB's corporate legal function. Amy joined UMB in 2014 as corporate legal counsel in litigation, and then in 2020, she was promoted to SVP, Deputy General Counsel and Manager of Legal Operations. Prior to UMB, she was a judicial law clerk for Judge Justine Del Muro at the Jackson County Circuit Court for 2 years, and was also in private practice as a commercial litigation associate for 2 years. Amy serves on the board of directors of the Jackson County Children's Services Fund and also volunteers at the Lazarus Ministries Urban Kitchen and Cultivate KC. Amy received her bachelor's degree from the University of Central Missouri and her law degree from the University of Missouri Columbia Law School. Welcome, Amy, to the Future is Bright podcast. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Chris. I'm pleased to be here.
So, Amy, I know you've got a lot going on, and I'm just grateful for you being able to carve some time for us to talk about your fun and wonderful story. I would love to start off with where you were raised. Where did this influence of you becoming an attorney come from? Tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I grew up in Southwest Missouri in a small town called Neosho, just south of Joplin. And, you know, I'll be honest with you, I didn't really have a lot of, I would say, specific influence in my life that drove me towards being a lawyer. For me, it was really about, I actually initially went to undergrad to study musical theater. And that was just something I was passionate about, something that I really enjoyed. And as I got into the program, I pretty quickly realized that you could have passion for something and it may not be what you want to spend your life doing. And that was really a point for me to kind of, I think, stop and reassess. And that's really, I think, where the direction started changing for me a little bit.
Were there certain musicals that you were involved in or you love, or do you have a favorite that you would always wish to do, say, up in Broadway in New York?
Oh, gosh. I did, it's funny. I was in a lot of musicals all through school, and was in Annie and Annie Get Your Gun. I played Annie a lot, weirdly. But I would say probably the most fun I had on stage was actually in a play called Brigadoon, which, if you've seen it, is just sort of like hijinks and fun. And I got to play this totally out of control character that like runs up and down the theater aisles, and it was so fun and so different from anything I'd done. And so I think if I had to do it again, it would probably be reviving Brigadoon. I just really had a lot of fun with that one.
That's so fun. So was it the plan, and were you a planner to say, I'm going to be in Broadway in New York City as you were kind of exploring this? I mean, you said obviously it became reality that was not the case for you, but...
Oh, yeah. I mean, and growing up on a farm in a small town, it was like the dream was probably somewhat motivated by just a desire to get away, if I'm being honest, and go to a big city. And so New York, flashing lights, Broadway was always really appealing to me. I actually had a big map of New York in my closet behind all my clothes at home. But really also just theater was a way for me to express myself. And I had a lot of energy. I think I was a little insecure, but acting was sort of this way you could embody someone else. You got to be someone else. And actually it's funny, without jumping ahead, I actually, looking back, I see so many parallels to that and being a litigator.
Yep.
right? You're up there performing and persuading people. But it took me a long time to see that parallel. But at the time, yeah, it was just a way for me to enjoy myself and express myself. And it was something that I enjoyed so much in high school that I thought, well, I'll just keep doing it. And had moderate small town success. You don't always realize that doesn't directly translate into Broadway when you're 18.
Completely. So I know you went to Mizzou in Columbia, Missouri. Was the idea to do theater there, or where you began doing like pre-law or political science or something like that?
Yeah, so in undergrad, it was always to start musical theater. And so I actually enrolled in the program, started classes, and very quickly, if you can't tell from the recording, I have a very specific style of voice. It's good for musical theater, it's good for jazz songs, but in a traditional music program, there is always a focus of classical music. And I'll be honest, as I got into the program, I'd always known that I didn't enjoy performing classical. My range is not perfect for it. And as I had to take more and more classes doing it every day, it just sort of took the fun out of it for me. And I actually remember asking the professor, I said, how could I perform what I want to perform, which is jazz songs and musical songs? And he said, yeah, that's really more of a minor. Like people who major, they perform classical pieces. Yeah. You really need to minor. And so it was not only about needing to change direction to be able to do what I want, but also realizing that what I thought I wanted, really the day-to-day wasn't fulfilling for me, and performing classical pieces wasn't for me. And so that was really, I think, the point at which I had to step back and decide what alternative route I was going to take.
So how did that happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, being told that you shouldn't major in what you're majoring in is a good motivator to do some assessment. And so I really just, being that not enjoying the day-to-day was what prompted me to think about what I was doing, I really started to just try to focus on what I did enjoy. And not just in college at that point, my first year, you're a freshman, you don't really know what you know or don't. So I really thought back to what did I enjoy in high school? And aside from musical theater, I had done speech and debate and forensics. And I really liked it. And it was another thing that gave me that same level of energy that theater did. But it was something that as I started to take classes that allowed me to do that in college with political science, I actually did love the day-to-day, unlike some of the musical classes I had taken in my music major. And so being with how much as I thought about what I enjoyed and what gave me energy, it was those poli-sci classes, those speech and debate and forensics classes. So I shifted over to poli-sci and could not have been happier. It was such an excellent fit and really, really loved that program.
So fun. And obviously Mizzou's law school is a wonderful law school, and
yes.
Lots of great students come out of there, including yourself. And so you decided to to do the judicial law clerk journey. You did 2 years there, and then you went into private practice. Share a little bit about that. What kind of matters were you helping writing on, and then as well as what were you doing in private practice?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I had the honor of being a law clerk, as you mentioned, for the Jackson County Circuit Court here. And really that was prompted by a desire that I had to try to become a trial attorney. I had taken trial practice in law school and really loved it. Again, it was something that unexpectedly filled me with energy and excitement. And I really just kind of followed that thread and knew that a lot of trial attorneys were law clerks first. So I signed up, and the really cool thing about being a trial clerk in Jackson County is that you have an opportunity to be in the courtroom every day. And so every day is different, but you're getting really exceptional exposure to what practice is really like. Because in law school, you don't actually know what practice is like. And even maybe in your first year of practicing in a firm, you don't see the inside of a courtroom. As a law clerk, I was in the courtroom every day. And so it was really an exceptional opportunity for me to see criminal cases, civil cases, motion practice, and to really see how a judge assesses cases and arguments. So that really, I served my 2-year term there and was asked to join the firm of Walters, Bender, Strobing, and Vaughn in Kansas City. And the reason I went with that firm is because I had seen them in the courtroom and they were incredible trial attorneys. So it was exactly what I wanted to do. And they really let me do that in those first 2 years. Obviously, as an associate, I did a ton of research for our litigation cases, but they also let me get in the courtroom and make arguments. And it was really exciting. And it was a really great chance to actually try my own skills out in the courtroom.
So fun. So did you know, or was it of interest to explore in-house roles? I mean, even in law school, did you have friends to go in-house, or along with that, how did this door open with UMB?
Yeah, I mean, I think my in-house journey is very similar to many people who are at a firm and decide to go in-house, which is, being in a firm is incredible. You get a ton of exposure to great projects and cases, but it is taxing. And it is something that if you don't have really good self-boundaries, you really, especially as a type A individual, you can really get yourself close to burning out. And I loved the work, and I put probably a little too much into it, and found myself near the end of my second year of practice just thinking, there's got to be a way for me to do what I love, which is litigation, but also in a way that maybe there's some more established boundaries while I work on my own personal boundaries. And I had heard that in-house was a really good option for that. And so I started exploring in-house roles for litigators. And for anyone who's done that, there are not a lot of them. No. And so it was a journey. It was a process. And I really just kept my ear to the ground to see who was hiring litigators. And I was very specific. I knew I didn't want to do something different at this point. I loved litigation and I wanted to try to make it work in-house. And so thankfully, about 6 months into my looking, UMB had an opening, and they were actually hiring their very first litigator. They were moving away from a generalist structure to more specialists. So I applied, had about 8 interviews, and was so thrilled to get to join the UMB team about a little over 8 years ago.
So I'd love to pause for a second, Amy, and you are absolutely right. There's very few posted litigation roles in today's market and previous markets. It's just rare. Would you share a little bit of advice to my audience, if they're a litigator, how they should posture their heart and how should they plan the process of trying to do what you did?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, first of all, as a litigator going in-house, I think you really need to be able to recognize what skills and values you're going to bring to that environment. And so understanding that one of the things that an in-house litigator really, really brings to the table is an ability to translate legal ideas, issues, theories to a layman audience, which is going to be corporate executives. Now, those individuals are going to be much more experienced than maybe just a normal Joe off the street, but they're still not someone who went to law school or really even has the time to dig into those issues like we do as lawyers. And so, if that is a skill that you've got, that ability to translate, that ability to make complicated things simple, being able to sell that is a resource that every organization can use, and not just in a litigation role, but really in any in-house legal role. And so I think first, thinking about what you can bring to the role is so important, because that is what you're going to market yourself with when you find the right role. And when I think it comes to finding roles, it's about, there's just a little bit of tenacity in there, right? It's checking LinkedIn and Indeed and job boards, but then it's also building that network, knowing really wonderful recruiters, knowing really wonderful, individuals who also work in-house. The in-house community, we are incredibly tight and helpful to each other. There's a local group of GCs that gets together all the time, and we're constantly saying, hey, look, I'm looking for this person, this role. Do you know anyone? And so if you have individuals in your network that are in-house or have connections in-house, I think really leveraging that is another great way to find out about openings, because as we said, they're not always posted. even if you are looking at job boards. So having a great recruiter or a great network is really essential. And then going back to your marketing points and being able to sell yourself is a great way to find a role.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I do appreciate it.
Yeah.
Amy, what kind of role did you start with at UMB?
Yeah, so I actually started out as just really truly a litigator. I mentioned they were hiring their first. Previously, they had 7 attorneys, and they all sort of worked on whatever came their way. And that is how a lot of small in-house groups function. Is you have to, by the nature of your work, be generalists. So they were. And so when I came in, sort of everyone said, whoo, and like took all their litigation and put it on my desk. And they're like, we're all done with this. You get to manage it now. So, the first step was really just to get my hands around the cases and then start to look at really building a litigation program, right? Making sure that we're doing litigation holds properly and we're looking at e-discovery rules in the right way and getting the right technology and the right processes in place for not only for me to manage the litigation properly, but for it to almost sort of become a self-evolving machine, right? Where it's like we get a case, we know exactly what to do. We've got the technology and the processes in place to be able to defend ourselves. And then I'm in the position of being able to focus on the case. So I spent really the first 5 years of my career doing that. I had taken on some management responsibilities, but largely it was just handling their cases, whether that be employment or commercial litigation, both plaintiff and defense for us, and really just kind of managing that for the company.
That's awesome. Let's take another moment, actually. Can you give context to who UMB Financial is and context to the city, what type, size of bank it is? I think you guys are the largest. So just would love for you to share a little bit about the bank.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Well, actually, and that's appropriate because we're actually coming up on our 110th year anniversary, which is really exciting.
Congrats.
For the bank. So yes, thank you. That I think speaks a lot to the company and the culture that it's been around for that long. And not only has it been around for that long, but it's thrived and been incredibly successful. And so we are, as you said, we are, the largest financial institution in Kansas City, and we're really a diverse financial institution. We have a lot of different businesses that we operate, whether that be our commercial lending, our consumer banking, or even our institutional banking. We do a ton of work in a lot of various areas, and because of that, we've grown tremendously in the last 110 years. We actually have presence in Missouri, Texas, Arizona, Colorado, Utah, Minneapolis. We have an office in Ireland where we do aircraft corporate trust work. Cool. So we've grown tremendously, and not only geographically, but in our areas as well. And we are publicly traded. So we've got shareholders, and we've got about close to 4,000 employees, between 3,600 and 4,000. So reasonably sized, mid-sized bank for the Midwest.
Yeah, that's exciting. Thank you. So after you grabbing a hold of and taming this docket of litigation that you were hired for, they asked you to do this next role as a deputy general counsel, and you were doing legal ops for them. Can you explain a little bit about this next role?
Yeah, actually, it speaks so highly of UMB and the culture there, but I actually put this role together and proposed it around my 5th year. It was something that, I'd been monitoring the in-house legal space for a few years and had seen more and more companies starting to create these roles that were focused on really, I think, running a legal department like a business unit, right? I mean, even though we're a support service, we are made up of experienced executives who are doing like very intense jobs every day. And we have a budget, and we have finances, and we have goals, just like any other line of business. And so I think this is something that, 3 years ago, a lot of in-house companies were doing. And just at UMB, what was happening is we were starting to have that need where, as they had been generalists and were transitioning into being more specific practitioners, everybody was heads down in their work, right? They were doing commercial lending transactions or litigation, and there wasn't as much of a focus on how do we get better? How do we mature? How do we plan our strategy for the next 3 to 5 years? And how do we make sure that we are growing along with the company to support them as businesses? And so I had over time started to take on more and more of those tasks because I liked them. And I had this incredible conversation with a mentor where she really challenged me to think about what really gave me energy and what I really loved doing, very much like I had done for myself earlier on in college. And at that point, I realized that while I really loved being a litigator, what I was doing now with, maturing the department and evolving some of our technology and our processes, and even the way that we as a department were structured, I got so much energy and drive out of that. And I just loved it. And there was a need for it. And so I put together a slide deck, and I took it up to the GC at the time, who was my boss. And I just said, look, I think I can add a lot of value. I think this role will ultimately pay for itself in what the cost savings and the improvements. And I'd really like to take a swing at it. And he said, great. He's like, you can go out to Colorado and talk to our CEO. And I took the same pitch deck and proposed it to him, and they let me start the role on the spot. And so I was probably a little bit out over my skis looking back at it, but ultimately I'm so glad I followed that advice and that I focused on what gave me energy, because there were definitely moments where it was scary to think about leaving litigation behind and doing something different. But the excitement about what did energize me really was moving me forward at that moment.
So I'd love to pause for a moment, because what you described is such an extraordinary opportunity and required courage and risk on your part. But so many attorneys, particularly in-house, get stuck. And you were self-aware. You had awareness of your organization. And it sounds like you had a culture of permission to let you put this together and present it. Did you have any concern of repercussions if they're like rejection, or, hey, thanks, Amy, go play with your litigation, or, and I'm thinking of how can this be some advice you could share with others who identify some stuff inside of them, or like, man, I wish I could do X, Y, Z.
Yeah. That's a great question. And it's something that I've reflected on a lot, because I've had people ask me, like, how did you do that? And how can I do that? And I think first of all, the comment you make about the culture is incredibly important. I can't speak highly enough of the culture that enabled this to happen, that existed at UMB, because there could be people in organizations that did exactly what I did and may not have been given that opportunity. So first of all, finding and identifying that you have a culture that's open to this is important. And I would encourage everybody to try to find an employer that has a culture that's open to creativity and change and development. And I'm grateful that UMB was. But I think the other thing that I really, really coach our team to do regularly is to stop putting yourself in that box of, I'm a lawyer, I'm a litigator, I'm a transactional attorney, I'm a contract attorney. Yes, you are that. But what are the skills that you use every day that make you good at that? Is it your attention to detail? Is it your tenacity? Is it your persuasion abilities? Is it your ability to see the forest for the trees? And really start to think about yourself as a set of skills. Because until I did that, I think I had a really hard time seeing myself as anything other than the label I had given myself. And this, frankly, the legal industry had given me, right? You're put in these boxes. And so I think, to me, it has to start there. You have to start thinking about yourself as a set of skills. And also, by the way, those skills change over time. You learn new skills, you adapt skills. Frankly, I've gotten worse at some things over time. So also being open to understanding that those aren't set in concrete, that with the skills you had 10 years ago may not be the skills you have today, and the skills you have today may not be the skills you have in 5 years. And so really almost even annually checking in and saying, like, what are the 5 top skills I'm flexing this year? I think that everything else sort of fell into place after that, because once I thought of the skills and saw a need, it just fell in place.
So interesting. So I have to ask you, you're exercising phenomenal self-awareness. Was any of this done through performance reviews or feedback from others to help you see those skills or notice those?
It was. So first of all, actually, something that has been huge in my career development is actually when I became a manager, which I was doing as the litigator. I was managing a team of people who helped me with it. UMB puts every new manager through a training program. And one of the first things they do is they give you the book Emotional Intelligence 2.0. And it's such an incredible read. And it's you mentioned self-awareness really helps you to identify your own strengths, weaknesses, and be more self-aware and emotionally familiar with yourself and others' emotional states. And so that was a huge part of it. But also I just had an incredible mentor who is actually now my boss. So I'm very blessed. Shannon Johnson, who she really just sort of sat me down, and she's the first person that said, what gives you energy? What takes away energy? And she even broke it down to say, I know that's a big question. So why don't you take a week, and every day when you do a specific task, you write down the task and you put a plus or a minus next to it. For it gives you energy or it takes it away. And at the end of that week, see if there are themes or if there are commonalities between the things that give you energy. And as I started to look at those tasks, I could identify, oh, it's when I'm flexing these skills that I'm starting to feel excited and energized. And, look, everybody likes to do something that they're good at, I think. Yeah. And so when you start to line up what's giving you energy, I think you can also then inherently start to identify where your strengths are. Because I think I would be hard pressed to find someone who got a lot of energy out of something they were really bad at. So I think it's a useful process, but Shannon really was, I give her so many kudos because I've fallen back to that advice several times already in the last 4 years since she gave it to me.
Love it. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So you're in a role that I would love for you to share how this came to you, why it came to you, and continue the same theme that we've just been discussing, because I think there's a lot of overlap here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned the legal operations role, and I spent a year in that role really trying to figure out where we were as a team and what the company needed from us. And in fact, I spent the first 6 months just conducting what I called a listening tour, where I sat down with every single leader or influential individual in our company.
Actually, I'm going to pause you for a second.
Oh,
I'm going to pause you for a second.
Yeah.
So are you describing you did your listening tour when you were deputy or when you became a general counsel or the chief legal officer?
When I was deputy general counsel. Yes. Okay. So yes, back into the legal ops role, kind of how I moved into the CLO role, which is what I'm in now,
right.
is I started off with that listening tour. And what that did is I think it instilled a lot of faith in me from our leaders. Like they really, that people loved being listened to. I'll never forget how powerful it was to sit down and just ask someone the question of, what are we doing well? How are we serving you? How do you feel about our performance as lawyers for you? That had such a impact on not just how we worked with our clients and the relationships we had, but it also really influenced the direction of the department. And about a year into that role of me making changes and taking that feedback and employing it, the company approached me and said, we love what you're doing and we'd really love for you to manage the legal team. And so they proposed that I would sit alongside our general counsel, who would shift his focus over to really, truly just the governance and corporate secretary work. He also does M&A work for us and a lot of our regulatory work. But that the legal team would shift over to the CLO role and report up through me and would give me a chance to really continue that legal ops work. So I really think it grew out of just my desire to be a better trusted advisor for our clients. And they saw that and wanted it to be a maybe more influential role.
Awesome. So one of the career themes you shared with me, you have two particular we're going to talk about, is your gift as a leader. And I loved when we discussed this before the call around you being a service-oriented, empathetic leader. And the question of, is this really valued or not, over lawyer skills? And I'd love for you to just elaborate some of that internal working as you're kind of thinking about what it means to lead as an attorney in a corporate legal department of a large corporation.
Yeah, well, I really do try to approach leadership in the way that I would want to be led. And the great thing is, for me as a leader, I've had wonderful examples of that throughout my career. Candidly, I've also had bad examples of that, but I think everyone has. And the important thing is to draw on those as a lesson. And one of my takeaways is that, I'm an incredibly hard worker. What I want to feel from my leader is just supported. I don't need them to do the work for me, but I want to feel like they've got my back. And so as I moved into the CLO role, I've mentioned this to you before, Chris, I have the most incredibly talented team of people reporting to me. And, I have 25 awesome lawyers who are all smarter than me and all know their business better than I do. And so they've made it easy for me to really own the role of just supporting them. But I knew that all they really needed from me to be successful was to have their back and to hear them out and give them the space to do what they do so well. And so I really just try to, as a leader, make sure that I touch base with them frequently, that I know what's going on in their lives professionally and personally, and that anytime they run into any problem, I'm there. And I make it a priority to pick up the phone and to call them back after they IM me on an issue or an email. And that when they need, I always offer, do you want me to stand behind you when you're doing this presentation, or preview it to grease the skids a little bit? What can I do to support you? How can I help? I think it's such a powerful phrase. As a leader, it doesn't feel powerful, but as a person who's been led by someone like that before, it makes you feel like you can do your job so much more effectively. And so I really try to be that type of a manager for my team. And that's what they need. They don't need me to do the work for them. They need me to have their backs and to help them problem solve and to flex the skills that I've got that add value. Right. So I'm really good at diplomacy and persuasion and knowing personalities and how to approach them. And so I always tell my team, I know you know the subject matter, but if you need help knowing the people that you're presenting it to, let's talk about it. Let's do a deep dive. And so knowing where I can add value to them and knowing where their value is and how we complement one another really allows me to kind of just stay in that lane a little bit and let them do their thing. And, that's a privilege I have because I have an incredible team, but it is also something that I had some really good examples before me show me how to do that.
You mentioned the book through your management training at the bank about emotional intelligence 2.0.
Yeah.
How did you grow into this place of creating safe space for your team to let them be who they were without your ego getting wrapped up in all your own stuff, which is so much a part of that journey? Share with my audience a little bit of the evolution for you growing into being an EQ leader.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. I have my role at the bank through most of my career there as the litigator put me in the position to really be in a lot of emotional situations, right? People are coming into your office and they are immediately just terrified. They don't want to be there. They don't want to deal with you. And so very early on, I started to recognize how my facial expressions and my tone and what I said were impacted on the people that were sitting in my office and coming to it. And I started to become very aware of how their emotions were coming into the conversation and how could I get them to where I needed them to be to understand the logic of this challenge versus the emotions of it. And so I frankly think the role of a litigator, and particularly a litigator in-house, where the people that might be in a lawsuit are also the people that you see in the lunchroom, right? It's sort of a more concentrated version of litigating. I think that role really prepared me to be an emotionally intelligent leader. And so I credit a lot of it to just litigating and being forced to be aware of my own emotional state and others. I think, but also one of the things I have realized is that I think if you have people who are talented and can do their job, you also see that if you give them like a really safe emotional place to work, man, they'll kill it. They'll just get in there and really rock it because they don't have other things to worry about.
Yeah.
You can allow them to be themselves and to express some emotions, but maybe it doesn't need to impact everything. Then you really give them a space to just perform versus coming in and worrying, oh, what's Amy thinking? Man, she's in a bad mood. I'm very conscious of like, what am I shedding off on my team and how might it influence them? And what does that do to them? And so I try really hard, if I put an unexpected meeting on someone's calendar, I'm very clear to tell them exactly what it's about. It's usually like, 20-minute meeting, really good thing, or 20-minute meeting, just quick convo about this, because I recognize that like my role and what I do, that could scare some people. And really, yeah. I go back to, that's born out of my experience as a litigator. Yeah. And maybe a bit of a people pleaser too, right? Because I always wanted people to come in and see me and be happy, and no one ever was. And so I really had to figure out a way of how to address that emotional state.
I love it. Great answer. Thank you, Amy. The other theme that you had shared with me, which I love, is this passion for giving back to law students, law grads, especially the first generation law student. Share a little bit with my audience how you've made yourself available, what you've done, and how people have benefited from your advice.
Yeah, well, I think, for me, my desire to give back to people has really been prompted by the people that gave back to me. And I really, I was raised by a mom who was very insistent that we give back to others. She was the child of an immigrant. She was, her mom was a single mother of 7 kids, and my mom basically raised her siblings, and she's incredible. And growing up, we didn't have a lot. I was a first generation college student, but my parents gave us everything we could need and always told us, because you have an obligation to give back to others who don't. And that doesn't just mean in a charitable sense of like canned food drives and donating to charities and things, which I do and I find important. I take it to mean in every sense of yourself, where you have excess or privilege or benefit, you have an obligation to give back to those who don't. And really, I remember going into class registration and on my first day of undergrad and crying because I didn't know how to register for classes, and my parents hadn't been through it and they didn't know. And there were people there that were kind enough and gracious enough to not make me feel embarrassed and to walk me through that. And I have found at every point in my career, if I've asked for help, I have received it. And so I just think of the incredible women, and not just women, and men and mentors, both at the courthouse and in private practice and in AWL and KCMVA, people who all I said was help. And they said, what can I do for you? And I wouldn't be where I am without that. And so I take it very seriously that at every opportunity I've got to mentor, particularly first generation college students, because that was me, and first generation attorneys, and really all attorneys, female attorneys, in particular, I just love to be there for them and say, what can I do? What connections do you need? What advice do you need? I've mentored people on very specific things about their career. I've mentored people about personal challenges they're going through while going through law school. I really just feel it's important to give back. And frankly, I think there's an element of karma, right? It's been given to me. If I return it, it's going to come back. And so, I think we all are privileged enough to be in the positions we're at, have an obligation and a responsibility to give back.
That's awesome. So with that being said, Amy, how can people find you, speak to you, connect with you, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think LinkedIn is probably the best way to do that. With general email, I think things can get lost, but I do try to check LinkedIn every so often. And I really tell all the students that I mentor, please always reach out to me via LinkedIn. When I say I'm happy to have a coffee or lunch, I mean it. I really do. And I love meeting new people. So people can reach out to me via LinkedIn and I'm happy to connect.
Splendid. Well, Amy, it's been an honor and pleasure. Thank you for your time and wisdom today.
Thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate being on here.